The origins and evolution of the Sicilian Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, offer a fascinating lens into the intersection of power, crime, culture, and history in Sicily and beyond. The Mafia began as a secret society during the tumultuous period of the early 19th century and has since evolved into a global criminal empire with far-reaching influence. To understand its rise from a local organization rooted in Sicily's unique social fabric to a powerful transnational syndicate, it's essential to delve deeply into the socio-political context, internal structures, and the changing dynamics of mafia activities over the centuries. The word mafia is thought to derive from Sicilian dialects, suggesting concepts of honor, self-reliance, and defiance against oppression. Sicily, during the 19th century, was characterized by lawlessness, frequent invasions, and a weak central authority, making the need for alternative sources of justice and order vital for survival. Wealthy landowners hired mafiosi to protect their estates from bandits and rival landowners, while the mafiosi offered their services to the local community in the form of protection and arbitration in disputes. In these early stages, the mafia operated under a code of silence known as omertà, which ensured their operations remained hidden from authorities and outsiders. At the time, the mafia was not a criminal empire as we understand it today, but a loosely organized brotherhood of men who valued loyalty, honor, and control over their respective territories. The organization's influence grew steadily, in part because of its deep ties to local political structures. Sicilian politics were chaotic, and politicians often relied on mafia backing to gain and maintain power. In return, the mafia received protection from prosecution and expanded its reach into legitimate enterprises. The unification of Italy in 1861 marked a significant turning point in the history of the mafia. The newly formed Kingdom of Italy sought to impose law and order across the nation, but its reach in Sicily remained limited. The centralized government was perceived as a foreign and oppressive force by many Sicilians, and the mafia capitalized on this sentiment by positioning itself as a defender of local interests. The state's attempts to impose its authority in Sicily were met with resistance, and the mafia, with its deep roots in the local communities, thrived. The mafia's influence grew in tandem with the political instability of the time. In many cases, politicians turned to the mafia for support during elections, relying on the organization to secure votes through intimidation, bribery, and coercion. This symbiotic relationship between the mafia and political power would become a defining feature of mafia operations in the years to come. In return for their services, the mafia received protection from prosecution and access to lucrative public contracts, particularly in construction and agriculture. During this period, the mafia began to take on a more structured and hierarchical organization. Mafia families known as cosche were based in specific territories, with each family controlling a particular geographic area. These families were loosely connected by a shared code of conduct, but each operated independently. The head of each family, the capo, wielded considerable power over both legitimate and illegitimate activities in their territory. The mafia became a shadow government in Sicily, exerting influence over local economies, political processes, and even the church. The mafia's reach extended into urban centers as well, particularly Palermo, where it became deeply entrenched in the citrus industry. Sicily's citrus trade was a booming business in the late 19th century, and the mafia quickly recognized the opportunities it presented. Through a combination of extortion, protection rackets, and control of transportation routes, the mafia dominated the industry. Citrus growers had little choice but to comply with mafia demands, as failure to do so could result in theft, violence, or even murder. This period marked the mafia's first foray into large-scale organized crime, and it would set the stage for its future growth. The turn of the 20th century brought new opportunities and challenges for the mafia. Waves of Italian immigrants, many of them from Sicily, arrived in the United States in search of a better life. Among them were mafiosi who saw the burgeoning Italian-American communities in cities like New York, Chicago, and New Orleans as fertile ground for their criminal enterprises. The mafia quickly established itself in these cities, importing the same methods of extortion, protection rackets, and political corruption that had served them so well in Sicily. In the United States, the mafia operated under the same principles of secrecy and loyalty, but the scale of its operations grew exponentially. Prohibition, which lasted from 1920 to 1933, was a watershed moment for the mafia. The nationwide ban on the production and sale of alcohol created a vast black market, and mafia families in cities across the country capitalized on this opportunity by controlling the illegal liquor trade. Prohibition made the mafia immensely wealthy and powerful, allowing it to expand its influence into other industries, including gambling, narcotics, and labor unions. The mafia in the United States, often referred to as the Italian-American Mafia, or the mob, became a dominant force in organized crime during the 20th century. It developed a complex structure, with families organized under the leadership of a boss, underboss, and consigliere. Major mafia families, such as the Genovese, Gambino, and Luciano families, became household names, and their activities extended beyond the criminal underworld into legitimate businesses and politics. Mafia influence reached its zenith in the mid-20th century, when figures like Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, and Vito Genovese became synonymous with American organized crime. While the mafia in the United States became a powerful entity in its own right, it maintained close ties to its Sicilian roots. Sicilian mafiosi often collaborated with their American counterparts, particularly in the global narcotics trade. Heroin, produced in Sicily and distributed through mafia-controlled networks, became a major source of income for both the Sicilian and American mafia families. The so-called French Connection, a heroin smuggling operation that linked Turkey, Sicily, and the United States, was a prime example of the mafia's ability to operate across national borders and thrive in the global underworld. In the decades following World War II, the mafia entered a golden age in Sicily. Italy's post-war reconstruction efforts brought massive public works projects to the island, and the mafia was perfectly positioned to exploit these opportunities. Through a combination of political connections, intimidation, and outright corruption, the mafia took control of major construction projects, securing government contracts and embezzling funds on a grand scale. The mafia's involvement in the construction industry was so pervasive that it became known as the Sack of Palermo, a period during which the mafia systematically pillaged the city's resources for its own gain. The 1950s and 1960s also saw the mafia become increasingly involved in the international drug trade. Heroin production and distribution became a cornerstone of mafia operations, with Sicily serving as a key hub in the global narcotics network. The mafia's profits soared, but so too did its profile. As the mafia's activities became more visible, so did the efforts to combat it. In Italy, a growing anti-mafia movement emerged in response to the mafia's stranglehold on Sicilian society. Activists, journalists, and judges began to speak out against the mafia, often at great personal risk. In the 1980s and 1990s, a series of high-profile trials, known as the Maxi trials, aimed to dismantle the mafia's power structure. Led by courageous magistrates like Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, the trials resulted in the convictions of hundreds of mafiosi, including top leaders. However, the mafia responded with brutal violence, assassinating both Falcone and Borsellino in 1992, an act that shocked the nation and galvanized further efforts to combat organized crime. Despite these efforts, the mafia remains a powerful force in the modern world. The organization's adaptability has allowed it to survive and even thrive in the face of government crackdowns, changing economic conditions, and the rise of new criminal organizations. The Mafia has diversified its operations, moving beyond traditional activities like extortion and drug trafficking into new areas such as cybercrime, human trafficking, and environmental crimes. The Mafia has also continued to expand its international reach, forging alliances with other criminal organizations and establishing a presence in countries around the world. Today, the Sicilian Mafia operates as a transnational criminal network with a highly decentralized structure that allows it to evade law enforcement while maintaining its grip on both legal and illegal enterprises. Although the Mafia's influence in Sicily has waned somewhat in recent years, it remains deeply entrenched in the island's political and economic systems. The Mafia's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, combined with its enduring code of silence and loyalty, ensures that it will remain a formidable force in the global criminal underworld for the foreseeable future. The story of the Sicilian Mafia is one of transformation and endurance. What began as a secret society born out of necessity in a lawless and feudal Sicily has grown into one of the most powerful and feared criminal organizations in the world. The Mafia's rise to power was fueled by its ability to exploit political instability, economic opportunities, and social conditions, both in Sicily and abroad. While efforts to combat the Mafia have achieved some success, the organization's resilience, adaptability, and deep roots in Sicilian society make it a persistent and enduring force in the global criminal landscape.